The Co-op with a Dark Secret. My name is Garrett, and this story started in my sophomore year at college. After freshman year, when I couldn't get a dorm, I was left scrambling for housing. The rents near campus were way too high for my budget, and there weren't many off-campus options. After searching for a while, I ended up settling in a co-op, part of a 3-house community on the outskirts of campus. It wasn't perfect, but it was affordable, and as someone who had a bike, I didn't mind the extra travel time. The house was old but charming. It was one of those large, decaying structures that looked like it belonged in the past. The creaky floors and narrow hallways seemed to whisper with memories, and the thick, musty air hinted at something ancient. Most of the residents were college students like me, young, energetic, and fresh out of high school. But there were a few exceptions, like the elderly woman who lived in one of the other houses. She stood out, but not in a good way. She was probably in her late 50s, though she looked much older, with graying hair that hung limply around her face. She moved with a limp, one that suggested a serious injury, and she rarely left her house. Her face was expressionless, and her eyes were always just a little too intense, as though she was constantly watching everything around her without ever saying a word. The first time I noticed her, she was sitting alone in the kitchen. It wasn't even her house. There were kitchens in the 2 other houses that had their own residents. Yet, there she was, sitting perfectly still, watching as the rest of us carried on with our conversations, cooking, and chatting. The weirdest part? No one acknowledged her presence. No one even said hello or goodbye when they passed by. It was like she was invisible, or worse, like she was some kind of silent observer, always lurking but never interacting. I caught her eye a couple of times, and each time I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at me, specifically at me. It was unsettling. But I pushed those thoughts aside and chalked it up to paranoia. But as the days went on, things began to get stranger. One night, I was in my room doing homework when I glanced out the window and saw her standing in the middle of the street, staring at my house. It was late, and the street was empty, yet there she was, still as a statue. I couldn't make out if she was staring into my window or just in the general direction of the house, but I felt a chill run through me. I waved at her, trying to be friendly, though deep down, I regretted it instantly. She didn't wave back. Instead, she jumped up and down, almost like she was excited, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. I felt sick. My stomach churned. What had I just done? Was she watching me all this time? Worse, now she knew exactly which room was mine. I tried to ignore it, but something inside me told me that this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It wasn't just an eccentric woman living alone, it was something far more sinister. The next day, I asked one of my housemates about her. He shrugged it off and said I should just ignore her like everyone else did. But it didn't sit right with me. The more I asked around, the more unsettling the answers became. One of the seniors in her house told me that she had a connection to the university, but that she was a little kooky and not to worry about her. But I couldn't stop worrying. Something about her behavior felt like a ticking time bomb. I was right. Things were about to get a whole lot worse. The woman who was always watching. The house's atmosphere began to shift. The other housemates started to notice the strange events surrounding the woman, but no one dared to confront her. They all just carried on with their lives as though nothing unusual was happening, as if it was somehow normal for someone to lurk around in the dark, just watching. One evening, as I was in my room, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone walking down the hallway. It was late, around midnight, and the house was eerily quiet. I peeked outside my door and saw her standing at the end of the hallway. I froze in place. She wasn't moving. She wasn't even looking at anything in particular. Her eyes were glassy and distant, and she stood there as if she was waiting for something. I took a step back, but as soon as I did, she turned her head towards me. It was like she had sensed my movement, or maybe she had been watching me the entire time. I didn't know what to do. Should I say something? Or should I just stay quiet and wait for her to leave? She didn't leave. Instead, she started to walk towards me, slowly, with that same blank expression. I felt like my heart had stopped beating. She walked past me as if I wasn't even there, heading into the kitchen. I tried to follow her, but when I got there, she wasn't there anymore. The kitchen was empty, just as it had been when I had first seen her earlier that day. I went back to my room, hoping it had all been a nightmare, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. The following days were filled with strange encounters. She would appear in places she shouldn't be, staring at me from across the street, standing outside my window, or just quietly watching from the edge of the yard. She never spoke. She never moved unless I did, and that's when things started to spiral. One night, as I lay in bed, the door to my room creaked open. My heart raced. I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't ready for what I saw. There, standing at the foot of my bed, was the woman. She was holding a small kitchen knife in her hand, her eyes wide and unblinking, like a predator about to strike. The air around her felt colder than usual, and I felt paralyzed by fear. Before I could react, she lunged at me, the knife aimed directly at my chest. I screamed, and the next thing I knew, I was wrestling her to the floor, struggling to take the knife from her grasp. She kicked and scratched, but I finally managed to disarm her. My housemates heard the commotion and rushed to my aid, pinning her down until the police arrived. As the police handcuffed her and led her away, I was left in shock. How had things escalated so quickly? The woman, whose name I later learned was Sylvia, was arrested on the spot. But the true horror was yet to come. The police found my lost room key on her. It was then that the truth came out. Sylvia wasn't just a resident, she was the property manager's sister. He had hidden her away in the house, avoiding any responsibility for her care. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of helping her, he kept her hidden from the world, using her as some sort of tool to keep things under control. Sylvia wasn't violent by nature. But something had snapped in her mind, and she had fixated on me. The idea of someone being that close to my room without me even knowing, it sent shivers down my spine. The property manager was arrested for negligence, and the university cut ties with him. But for me, the trauma lasted long after the police left. The house, once a place of fleeting memories and quiet moments, had turned into a house of nightmares. And I knew, deep down, that I'd never feel truly safe again. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I went through the motions: classes, work, friends, but my mind was always back in that moment, in that room. I couldn't shake the image of her staring at me, the look in her eyes as she lunged at me with that knife. I couldn't escape the fear that lingered like a shadow. My life had changed, and there was no going back to the way things were before. I was no longer just a college student living in a co-op. I was a survivor of something far darker than anything I could have imagined. The aftermath and the truth behind the mystery. The days following Sylvia's arrest were filled with uncertainty. I was unable to focus on anything, my mind always drifting back to the night she tried to kill me. The image of her standing at my door, the knife in her hand, the wild look in her eyes, it haunted me every time I closed my eyes. I tried to go back to my normal routine, but it wasn't the same. Every creak of the floorboards, every knock at the door, every shadow in the corner of my eye made me jump. My housemates were sympathetic, but they couldn't understand. They hadn't been in my shoes. They hadn't seen what I had seen. It wasn't until I spoke to one of the senior residents that I learned the truth about Sylvia's past. Apparently, she had been living in the co-op for years, though no one really knew the full extent of her history. The property manager had kept it a secret, hiding her away from the rest of the residents. Sylvia had been mentally unstable for years, and instead of getting her the help she needed, her brother, the property manager, kept her locked away in one of the unoccupied rooms. He had hoped that by keeping her there, no one would question her presence. What was most disturbing, though, was the fact that she had been watching me long before I even noticed her. It seemed like she had fixated on me from the very beginning, stalking me in a way that was both unnerving and terrifying. Why me? What made me different from anyone else in the house? I may never know the answer, but the fact that I survived was nothing short of a miracle. The police report was filed, the property manager was arrested, and Sylvia was sent to a mental health facility for proper treatment. As for me, I tried to move on, but the scars of that night would stay with me forever. The co-op I once called home was no longer a place of comfort. It had become a symbol of fear and confusion. I moved out of the co-op soon after, and though I graduated college without incident, I never forgot about that night. It was a constant reminder of how fragile life could be and how easily it could be shattered by one person's obsession. And to this day, I wonder what if I hadn't reacted so quickly. What if I hadn't screamed when I saw her with the knife? Would she have succeeded in her attempt? Would I have been another statistic, another victim of someone who had simply been overlooked and forgotten by the system? These are the questions that haunt me, the questions that will never have an answer. And in the end, all I can do is remember, and be thankful that I'm alive to tell the tale.